Good afternoon, everybody. Today we'll be giving an exciting seminar titled Future of Energy Resources After COVID-19. Can it be an opportunity to finally shift to sustainable energy? This webinar is sponsored by HBKU, and the speakers and the host are from Hamad bin Khalifa University, College of Science and Engineering, the Division of Sustainable Development. This seminar starts now from 12 p.m. until 1 p.m. And basically, the speakers will speak for about 40 minutes. After that, the attendees can ask questions. Of course, they can ask questions anytime during the Q&A. And after both speakers finalize their talk, we will, of course, answer your questions. So we are looking for very exciting questions, and we hopefully will be able to answer most of them. So let's go to the speakers. The first speaker here is Dr. Yusuf Becher. He's Assistant Professor at Sustainable Development Division at the College of Science and Engineering, Hamad bin Khalifa University, Doha, Qatar. His research area focuses on solar energy utilization processes, innovative approaches, and development of renewable-based integrated energy systems. Dr. Yusuf received his PhD in mechanical engineering from the University of Ontario, Canada. He completed his Bachelor's of Science in Control Engineering 2012 and a Master's degree in Energy Science and Technology from Istanbul Technical University. His PhD thesis focused on electrochemical-based hydrogen and ammonia production options. So we are delighted having him here with us today to discuss about the future of energy resources and how can we finally shift to sustainable energy. I think he is the right person for this talk, and we're happy to have him. Then we will go for the host and the speaker, which is me. My name is Dr. Ahmed Abu Sheikha, and I'm also Assistant Professor at Sustainable Development Division at the College of Science and Engineering at Hamad bin Khalifa University in Doha, Qatar. I received my Bachelor of Science in Petroleum Engineering and a Bachelor of Arts in Economics from the University of Texas at Austin in 2004. In 2006, I received a Master's in Geoscience, Reservoir Geoscience and Engineering from Institut Français de Pétrole in France. Then I worked for a couple of years at Total and Qatar Petroleum, and in 2013, I received a PhD in Petroleum Engineering from Imperial College London. And between 2015 and 17, I did a postdoctoral fellowship at Stanford University, specializing in reservoir simulation and fluid flow and porous media. So the structure of the presentation or our webinar today will be divided into a few questions. So we decided to present to you guys 5 questions that I think that needs answers or needs some discussion at the moment. These 5 questions are: the first one, why COVID-19 presents an opportunity to expedite the transition to renewable energy sources? What are the alternatives, and how can we transit to renewable energy resources? Also, something interesting happened about a month ago. Why did the oil price drop below zero? Is that even feasible? Did people think about that before? And what are the prospects of the oil and gas industry beyond COVID-19? Since we are both speaking today from the LNG capital of the world, how will that affect the oil and gas industry, and is the natural gas industry immune to this? So first we'll start with Dr. Yusuf, where he will present to us his answers or his discussion about the first 2 questions. After that, I will take over to discuss with you guys the fossil fuel energy resources and what we think will happen to it after COVID-19. So now I'll give the presentation now to Yusuf to take over, please.
Okay. Thank you very much for the nice introduction, Dr. Ahmed. I hope this webinar will try to answer the questions in the minds of the audience and also other people. So first, we will try to answer why renewable energy is important and what COVID-19 presents an opportunity. What type of opportunity do we have in COVID-19? As you know, after the COVID-19 started, we had faced a lot of shutdowns and closures, especially in the manufacturing plants, road transportation, air transportation, as well as ship transportation. Before the COVID-19, we had a lot of emissions in the sky, especially in the congested cities such as Beijing, India, Mumbai, and other countries. We're facing smoke, smokes, also dusts, particulate matters, nitrogen dioxide emissions in the sky. Here in the right side of the figures, you see a lot of emissions in the skies of these cities due to mainly traffic congestion as well as power production. On the right side, on the bottom figure, you see the world, in fact, has experimented a drastic decrease in the nitrogen dioxide emissions. So this has become very important because of transportation sector reduced the mobility, and also due to reduced consumption of energy, power production plants has decreased their capacities. In the next slide, I will show you how these emissions reduced in the northern China and also in northern Italy. So here first, let's check northern China. Before COVID-19 2020, the nitrogen dioxide emissions were very high in the top levels. As you know, the world in the last year has experienced the highest CO2 level in the atmosphere as well. So let's check one more time. In the beginning of 2020, in January, the nitrogen dioxide emissions was very high, and at the end of March, it decreased almost 60% compared to before COVID-19. Let's check the Northern Ireland as Northern Italy as well, which was the in fact capital of COVID-19 in the beginning. Here also faced almost 55% reduction in the nitrogen dioxide emissions. So why nitrogen dioxide is important? Because it is the end product of combustion of petroleum fuels, also natural gas and other fossil fuels. When natural gas or other fossil fuels is combusted, you emit a lot of nitrogen dioxide, which eventually harms the lungs of the humankind, also which causes breathing problems. Not only nitrogen dioxide, of course, other emissions have decreased as well, especially particulate matter 2.5, which shows 2.5 micrometer. The particulate lower than 2.5 micrometer is called PM 2.5. Even they have decreased almost 35% in northern China. So the particulate matter, in fact, is again a byproduct of combustion, especially in the vehicle transportation sector. When you burn diesel or gasoline from the exhaust pipe, we always have particulate matter emissions. And since they are lower than 2.5 micrometer, they are not easy to control, and they easily inhaled into the human body, which eventually causes a lot of diseases. In fact, when you check the world health statistics, you will see that many of the deaths are caused by the air quality in our existing world. So why do these emissions reduce? Because of these two sectors. As you see on the right chart, pie chart, transportation sector was about 29% global emissions of the US in 2017. Electricity is 29 as well, industry is 22. So these three junk industries are causing the main emissions in the world, mainly transportation and power generation, which is constituting almost more than half of the emissions. How can we understand whether they are really affecting the environment? We check the statistics. So here on the left side, you see energy consumption portfolio of the world. 32% of the global energy is going into transportation, 17% power generation, and 51% heating and cooling. So these sectors, in fact, are easily addressable or replaceable by alternatives to fossil fuels. Almost 73% of global electricity generation is from non-renewable sources. We have 25%, 26% from renewables. However, they are mainly hydropower. Hydropower we have been using for several years. It is, of course, a clean type of power generation, but the availability of hydropower is, of course, limited to regions. For example, in Middle Eastern countries, unfortunately, we don't have natural groundwater sources or rivers, which cannot be used for power generation from hydropower. The remaining 10% of global electricity generation is coming from renewables. This is good, but they are so-called emerging renewables. Under that category, we have wind turbines, solar photovoltaics, biopower, and somehow concentrated solar power systems. But of course, their share is still very limited, less than 10% of the global energy consumption. The trend, what will happen in the future, also was statistically analyzed by several agencies, energy agencies in the world. So coal will be reduced, of course, eventually after 2020. The petroleum and other liquids derived from oil and gas are still increasing and will continue to increase. In fact, they are the highest energy consumption type in the world for now, almost 200 exajoules. After that, coal and then natural gas. Natural gas plays an important role during transition from more dirty fossil fuels such as coal to renewables, because natural gas emits less emissions during combustion or utilization in power generation or transportation. So this scenario shows that the Earth, in fact, has experienced a laboratory scale test. What would happen if we were able to use clean alternatives? When COVID-19 happened, we reduced emissions, but it was due to immobility and reduced mobility. But we can also achieve this when we use clean alternatives. So this was a very good example for us. But we have to take the action now. Otherwise, if we continue business as usual, the emissions will rise immediately to the same levels before COVID-19. First is the renewables. And renewable energy sources which can address the power generation and also the transportation part of the emissions are the key playing role here in these sectors. First, we have solar energy, wind energy, hydropower, biomass or even waste energy, geothermal, ocean thermal, and tides and waves. And ocean energy can be divided into mechanical energy, which is tides or waves, or thermal energy, which can extract the thermal energy of the subsurface and also surface of the ocean using conventional power cycles. So these are all renewables, but some of them are limited to geographical locations. For example, hydropower, as we have said, if we don't have the rivers or hydro dams, we cannot use it. Geothermal is also very location specific. Only some parts of the world can have the geothermal for power generation or for heating purposes, especially where the earthquakes happen frequently, such as Ring of Fire region, New Zealand, Australia, or Japan. They have geothermal sources. Ocean thermal or ocean waves are also somehow site-specific, because there are special regions of the world that have high temperature gradients between the surface of the ocean and the subsurface of the ocean. To make it feasible, of course, they are desired to be a higher temperature gradient above 20 Celsius. Biomass and solar, in fact, are more diverse. You can have this type of renewables in several locations of the world, because sunshine is everywhere during daytime. With reduced irradiances in some regions like north or south of the world, but still we had the sunshine during the daytime. Biomass or waste is also available. As long as the human is available, we will have some type of waste generated, or we will have the plants that we use for our food or agricultural purposes. These can be used for power generation or for fuel production, biofuel production, for example. Wind energy is also in fact, among the others, wind energy is one of the highest efficiency after maybe mechanical energy conversion of hydropower and ocean tides. It is also very location specific. Some regions have higher than 6 to 7 meter per second. So in order to wind turbine to be feasible, it is desired to have about 6 to 7 meter per second wind speed on average during the year. So these renewables can be used for power generation. As you remember, it was almost 17% of global energy consumption, so which can address the clean power generation. It can be, or these can also be used for other purposes, such as desalination, because not only electricity is produced when you use renewables, other type of useful products can be also generated, such as thermal energy or fuel. So thermal energy, solar energy, for example, can be used as a thermal source, which can derive the freshwater production desalination plant. Because as you know, the thermal-based desalination systems use thermal energy around 880 or 90 Celsius. In order to produce this thermal energy, what we do here in Qatar or in many other countries, we burn the natural gas and then we use it for thermal energy production. When we are able to use solar thermal energy, either in concentrated form or non-concentrated form, we can derive the desalination plant without natural gas combustion. So this will reduce the carbon footprint of freshwater production sector. Is it feasible? Yes, there are many countries doing it now. So the cost was playing an important role. However, due to the recent developments in this sector, the cost of freshwater has also reduced drastically when you use solar energy form. In addition to thermal energy we can use for desalination, we can also use them for industrial processes. For example, in aluminum industry or in many natural gas reforming industry, you need a high temperature steam or high temperature process heat. Can we achieve this high temperature process heat for steam methane reforming or for aluminum sector? Yes, because we have distinct engineering devices. For example, concentrated reactors, which can achieve up to 1200 Celsius. So it means, for example, even for melting the metal, you can use the concentrated solar energy with engineered devices for process heating. The current case, we use fossil fuel combustion for producing these heat. But in the proposed case or the alternative case, we can use renewables or solar energy, concentrated solar energy, or even biomass combustion to achieve this temperature. The process becomes carbon neutral. Why? Because you don't consume carbon or carbon-derived fossil fuels. You replace this with another energy source, which is concentrated solar energy in that case. The feedstock is still natural gas. For example, if you want to produce hydrogen from steam methane reforming method, you use CH4 methane as a feedstock. But the process heat comes from concentrated solar energy, which reduces the carbon footprint significantly. And the last part I want to discuss about the transportation. So as you remember, transportation was almost 30% responsible of the global greenhouse gas emissions. So if we are able to substitute fossil fuel-based fuels such as gasoline, diesel, we can cut these 30% emissions to these after COVID-19 levels. In fact, the clean transportation has become quite important in the recent years, especially electric vehicles has been started to be used in several regions of the world. For example, California has adopted EVs in large scale. They have installed a lot of electrical vehicle charging stations recently. In addition to electric vehicles, we have so-called fuel cell vehicles. So fuel cell vehicles are in fact similar to electric vehicles. They have electric motors on board. So the difference between electric or fuel cell vehicle and the conventional vehicle, let's say, is the in fact main engine and fuel type. We don't employ an internal combustion engine in these type of vehicles. We employ an electric motor, but we need to produce electricity either on board or on site and then charge the electric vehicle. In the fuel cell vehicle case, we store chemical energy on board. For example, hydrogen or even natural gas fuel cell vehicles are available, or ammonia fuel cell vehicles or methanol fuel cell vehicles. So like a similar to conventional vehicles, we have a storage tank in the trunk or in the bottom of the vehicle where we store compressed hydrogen, liquid ammonia, or liquid methanol. And then this fuel is not sent to the internal combustion engine, but is sent to a fuel cell, which is an electrochemical device that converts fuel energy into electricity without combustion. Two significant advantages that they offer. One is the emissions. We don't emit a lot of carbon dioxide emissions or nitrogen dioxide emissions because we use carbon-free fuel such as hydrogen and ammonia, or less carbon containing fuel such as methanol or ethanol compared to gasoline or diesel. Secondly, the efficiency of this vehicle is very high. What it means, if you combust gasoline or diesel, and if you use inside a vehicle, you have around 30-35% efficiency from fuel to the propulsion. In the fuel cell vehicle, you have around double efficiency, 70%. In electrical vehicle, in fact, it is even higher because you store electricity and you use electricity directly. The electricity conversion efficiencies are higher than 80-90%. And the renewables that we have mentioned, for example, biomass, can be used as a feedstock for biofuel production. When we say biofuel, it can include ethanol, methanol, or even biodiesel. So biodiesel is a replacement of diesel, but made synthetically from biomass. Or these renewables can also be used for producing hydrogen or ammonia. Hydrogen is H2. Ammonia is NH3 in terms of chemical formula. So they include both hydrogen. Even ethanol or methanol include hydrogen as well. How can they be used? First, we can use water electrolysis or seawater electrolysis. Seawater includes H2O molecules, which can be cracked and produce hydrogen. Or we can use steam methane reforming or methane cracking using, as I mentioned, the solar energy. So these will reduce the production carbon footprint of these chemicals. Of course, there are some challenges in hydrogen storage on board. Fuel cell vehicles, but on the other hand, fuel cell vehicles have been employed very popularly in Japan. And you can see a lot of fuel cell vehicles on the streets and charging stations, hydrogen fueling stations. And they are practical. So one example in the past, is coming from 1943 during the Second World War. It was a similar situation of COVID-19. There was an extraordinary case in the world, and World War II was causing a lot of shortages. One of them was the fuel shortage. So people were using their petroleum products for maybe military purposes, but they cannot use it for public transportation. So what people have done in Belgium, 1943, they have used an liquid ammonia vehicle at that time, liquid ammonia bus. So one of the scientists developed a liquid ammonia plus coal-based bus that can run on these fuels, which emits less emissions compared to, in fact, diesel or gasoline, but which was also a final product of a shortage of fossil fuels, because ammonia can be produced from hydrogen, which can come from water, or it can also from air, nitrogen, air separation. So this is a good example that we can implement in the current COVID-19 scenario, because we have the similar case. We have shortages, or we have maybe extra now oil, but we have seen that if we are able to reduce the emissions in the transportation sector, we can achieve a lot of high air quality improvement. So lastly, I want to show, okay, let's say we switch to clean transportation, but are we really able to reduce emissions? Here, this graph shows the answer, in fact. When we check the global warming potential of different fuels and different vehicles, and when we compare them, we will see that how electrical or hydrogen vehicles can reduce emissions. Here on the right side, gasoline vehicle. First, methanol vehicle, because it is produced from, again, steam methane reforming, high emissions, but gasoline vehicle as of now is emitting almost 250, 260 grams per traveled kilometer. Yeah, per each kilometer you travel, you emit 250 grams of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. Even in the manufacturers, you can see in their data sheet, they report their CO2 emissions per kilometer. Somehow it is about 150, 160 in their data sheets, but they only show during operation. This graph I show here considers from production of the vehicle, maintenance and until the combustion of the fuel inside the vehicle. And this is a full life cycle. So when you check the CNG vehicle, for example, you can use even compressed natural gas. You can reduce the carbon dioxide emissions up to 200 grams per kilometer level. But if you use electrical vehicle, up to 150 grams per kilometer. So less than half of the emissions are cut. But the important thing in electrical vehicle is the supply of the electricity. How do you produce electricity? If you produce from fossil fuel based power plants, then you end up with 150. But if you use full renewable electricity, you can even lower it to 50 grams per traveled kilometer. So which is almost 5 times less than conventional gasoline vehicle. Hydrogen vehicle has a similar carbon footprint of electrical vehicles when it is used from renewables. Secondly, lastly, we have checked which type of renewables can we use for producing the electricity in the electrical vehicles. If you use only PV, electric vehicle PV, you are in the range of 50 grams. If you use grid mixture without a renewable, 150. If you use hybrid electric vehicle, in fact, you still do not lower the emissions much. Yeah, they are still in the range of conventional gasoline vehicles. If you are able to use electric vehicle using nuclear, for example, it is slightly less than PV. which is in fact a clean source of energy as well. So this is a good picture that it shows when we are able to switch to clean transportation fuels, we can reduce these global warming emissions significantly, as we did in this COVID-19 period. But it was not due to the fuel replacement, but it was due to mobility reduction. We can achieve these Paris Agreement targets easily, even in transportation sector and also power generation sector. So this was the my presentation. I hope we answered your questions clearly. Just note that the question answer session will be at the end of the presentation. You can type your questions in the Q&A button. So this will help us to get ready, and then you can easily and you don't have to speak, but you will write on the Q&A session. Now I will give the floor to Dr. Ahmed.
Thank you, Yusuf, very much for this very interesting talk. So basically what happened in the reduction of emissions due to the immobility of most of the citizens around the world. Is that correct, Yusuf?
Yes, exactly. Mostly it is due to immobility of people. It was caused, but when we usually rise, we didn't take action, but that's why it is the correct for.
Excellent, thank you, Yusuf. So I'll take the ball from you now, and I'll continue talking about fossil fuels. But first, I would like to speak about a very extraordinary behavior that happened, I think a month ago or 6 weeks ago. The price of oil went negative. I mean, I remember that evening very well. I was sitting watching TV in my house, and all of a sudden, I get a WhatsApp message. One of my colleagues, and he told me, "Did you check the price of oil?" I told him, "No, what really?" It's almost like $1. That really $1. I mean, that never happened. Then 15 minutes later, it's like minus $5. Then towards the end of that evening, it was like minus $37. So that even economically, basically, you're not selling anymore. I mean, if you are actually not buying anymore. I'm sorry, you are selling it. So that was very extraordinary. So why did that happen? I mean, let's look at what Yusuf said, because a lot of people stopped moving. And there's a very interesting website, which I would like to take you guys to, that puts it in a very nice way. Why did we have this happening? So going back to Yusuf, he said a lot of people basically stopped moving. And that's true. That's what we call here a demand shock. So most of the airplanes were grounded towards the middle of March. And also a lot of people were told to stay home. So a lot of people stopped using public transportation. They stopped using their own cars, and they mostly stayed home. However, if people stay home, they're still using energy, like electrical energy, correct? But most of our transportation system depends on fossil fuels like oil. So this brings us to supply shock. So basically, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Republic of Russia had a small price war. They were trying to, what do we call it, control market share. So unfortunately, they couldn't agree on some certain supply shocks. That's towards April or towards March, I believe. And yeah, towards March. And that's when basically it carried over towards April and the price shock. So let's look at the events. In February 13, China decided to they don't need any extra oil anymore, and they start turning away oil tankers. Then in March 3rd, OPEC Plus, which is OPEC plus other independent suppliers like Russia, their talks collapsed. During that period, not a lot of people around the world, especially policymakers, understood the magnitude of COVID-19. So as you can see, most of Europe, they decided to do the lockdown around, I think, middle of March or the last week of March. But during the first week of March, not a lot of policy makers fully understood in the developed world the magnitude of this virus. So the talks collapsed. Then the Saudis decided to decrease the price of oil to Europe and China by $6 to $8. Then you can see in middle of March, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic. Then, fortunately, in April 9th, the Saudis and the Russians, they agreed to cut almost 10 million barrels of production, but that was too late. Why is it too late? Because that's already beyond the contract that's being sold in April. That's supposed to end towards the end of April. So that will not take effect till May. So what happened? A lot of people were basically buying and selling this commodity in the market. And because a lot of people were staying home, most of the oil were still in the tankers, and some of the oil are being stored. So usually we don't have much storage capacity around the world because most of the oil that gets produced gets utilized. So all of a sudden now, most of the capacity around the world is getting full, and a lot of oil is being produced. So there isn't a place for it to be stored. And most of the contracts that are being sold that crashed toward -30, if you buy a contract of such, you will need to basically go collect it from a very nice town called Cushing, Oklahoma. So if you bought the contract of April, you probably need to go and collect it. If there's no more storage, or you need to find a way to use it. So a lot of people realized that they can't store it because most of the storage facilities in Oklahoma are full, and most of the oil tankers are being used. As you saw, that a lot of oil tankers are being turned away in China, the starting of the month of February. So that's also was not feasible. So all of a sudden, the people who were buying and selling this going to realize they actually need to take these contracts. They need to go collect the oil from Oklahoma. So they said, okay, I got no place to store. I cannot have this oil. I live in a small flat in New York, where I'm staying home and I'm trading this contract. So what I'm going to do? So they started selling it to a point that they're starting paying people to take it from them because it costs them more if they have to drive all the way to Oklahoma and actually collect the oil. So a lot of people start paying people to take out this oil from them because they cannot collect it. So that's also the bizarre thing how this happened. But why it didn't happen again on the May contract? That's if we go back to what happened in OPEC Plus, is to April 9th, Saudis and Russia decided to cut supply by 10%, by 10 million barrels, which was unprecedented. So that's almost 10% of a supply cut. So that's why this happened, this bizarre and what we can call a demand shock and a supply shock, perfect storm, if this is the case. So that answers one of the questions. Let's move now to the next question, please. Okay. All right. So as we saw now how the behavior of the markets were acting weird, what are the prospects of the oil and gas industry beyond COVID? Is it now basically people are selling oil, are paying you to use their oil, or what's going on here? Let's go and see what happens. So I want to give you just a perspective on how much energy is stored around the world in this energy resource. There's a certain terminology, and maybe some of you saw it in the news, something called barrels of oil equivalent in barrels. So that's basically any type of fossil fuel, would it be oil or natural gas. We basically use the units of oil equivalent of barrels, which I'll discuss with you in the next slide. But I just want to give you perspective about the energy resource of this type of the fossil fuel that's being stored in the subsurface. So this is a pie cake of the shares around the world. You can see the largest share here. There's about 1.3 trillion barrels of oil equivalent around the world. To put that in perspective, currently there's about 90 billion barrels of oil production per day, and we have about 1.7 trillion reserves at the moment. So if we look here in Saudi Arabia, they have about, let's say 20%, the National Iranian Oil Company under 20%, and QP has also about, let's say 15% share, and Iraq, Venezuela, Abu Dhabi, Kuwait, Nigeria. So these 7 or 8 companies around the world, and also Libya, they control about 75 to 80% of the world reserves in fossil fuels. And that would be oil and gas. So you can see there's a tremendous amount of oil, and what happened for the price to go below is because of the supply shock. The demand became low, but the supply was large. Because they cut it, now things are being stable, and we get about, the price of oil is about $40 to $45. So another thing I would like you guys to take away from this webinar is what is barrels of oil equivalent? A lot of people hear it in the news, you're watching TV, and then you see barrels of oil equivalent. So what is that? This is a small explanation. So in energy resources, we usually use British thermal units to quantify the quantity of energy in a certain resource. Similar to calories of food. So let's say if you have a pizza, let's say a medium pizza or a large pizza has about 900 calories. That's equivalent to, let's say, 11 apples. Okay. The same thing for oil and gas. So 1 barrel of oil has about 6 million British thermal units in energy. So if you burn oil, you get 6,000 British thermal units of energy. For natural gas, 1,000 standard cubic feet, 6,000 standard cubic feet equals 1 barrel. So going back, 1 cubic feet, standard cubic feet of gas gives you 1,000 BTUs, and 6,000 standard cubic feet, so a volume of 6,000 standard cubic feet of natural gas can give you the equivalent of oil. So that's a question for you guys. The current estimates, or some time ago, the production of Qatar and natural gas, let's say it's around 20 billion standard cubic feet of natural gas. So how much is that in barrels of oil equivalent? If you guys could answer that in the Q&A, would be fantastic. So yeah, we'll give you the answer after the talk. So now going back to the future of oil and gas. So this is basically a normalized price of oil since 1860 until 2014, adjusted for inflation for the prices of oil in 2013. Let's go back to certain pandemics around the world. If we go to, let's say, 1918, the Spanish flu, as it was called, you can see the price of oil went up. Okay, why is that? There's lots of things. I mean, because one of the things, the world was not as connected as it is today, and also before, most of the people that did the machinery work were actual people. Where now, lots of the factories are mostly automated. If you take an LNG ship, for example, it does not require a lot of crew to ship LNG from Qatar, let's say, to Japan. Where before 80 years ago, 100 years ago, it required a lot of people. So that one of the reasons why I promoted the price increase. So what happened to this price collapse a month ago? That was basically extraordinary behavior due to 2 things happening at the same time: the increase of supply and the decrease in demand. So what about all these large spikes? Most of them, unfortunately, are due to wars or recessions around the world, because energy is intertwined with politics and economics. So they all go hand in hand. That's about it. What about, let's go to the next question now. What about the natural gas industry? Is it immune? Okay. Going back to what Dr. Yusuf mentioned earlier, that most of the electricity generation was for, I believe, transportation, and I forgot what's the second thing. They account about 50%. So most of the electricity generation was for, let's say, public transport and other energy demanding mobility behavior. So I think about 50% was for mobility. So what about the natural gas? As he said earlier, that natural gas has less carbons. So it has less emissions. So let's say a methane is CH4. So for each 4 hydrocarbons, you get 1 carbon. Where the case for oil, let's say C4 or C5 or C6, it has much larger ratio of carbon. So its future is a good transition energy resource until we reach sustainable energy. Another thing I would like to guys to get from this webinar is, since we are talking from the LNG capital of the world, to put things in perspective, how much energy resources in terms of natural gas is in Qatar. So if we would like to calculate, this is basically before the increase in reserves that was announced by Qatar Petroleum a couple of years ago. The current reserves of oil and gas in Qatar accounts for about 170 billion barrels of oil equivalent, with a daily production, let's say, around 5 million barrels of oil equivalent. So that accounts for 8.5 terawatt hour per day of electricity generation. So if we took this 5 million barrels of oil equivalent and we converted it into electricity generation, we would get 8.5 terawatt hour per day. What does that mean? So if we look at the consumption, okay, in 2008 per day, in 2018, I apologize, per day, around the world is 73. So if we only used the energy resources of the subsurface and the state of Qatar, we would be able to supply 15% of electricity demand all around the world. Let's look at another scenario. If we decide to supply all the electricity generation all around the world, so imagine the state of Qatar becomes a power generator for the all electricity all around the world, we would able to meet this demand for 10 years constantly. So that just gives you a perspective. So if all the power generations around the world are connected to the energy resources here, the electricity around the world will be able to generate for 10 years nonstop if they're only supplied by energy resources here. So what currently happened in COVID-19 was basically a demand shock, because as we said, energy, economics, and politics are intertwined. And all of a sudden, in middle of March, countries around the world decided to tell their citizens to stay home. Don't go out. Stay home for the next couple months. So that decreased dramatically the price of oil, but not that much of LNG. But over the next couple months, we will see the effect on that on the LNG. Why is that? Because most of the LNG contracts are long-term. And a lot of now buyers are renegotiating their contracts based on the price of oil that happened a couple of months ago. So we're not out of the woods yet, but it's slightly brighter than the oil industry. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the fall. That's something to look at. And that's it. I finish my part. We are now ready to take your questions. Okay.
If you have any questions, feel free to type them. Dr. Ahmed, one question has come about oil production. So, as you said,
yes,
after a while, Russia and Saudi Arabia agreed. But
yes.
but still, the oil was underground, so they cut the production.
Yes.
So can they use underground as a storage tank for oil, and can they control the price using this technique?
That's a very interesting question. Yes, actually, that's what some oil companies did. They started buying their old oil back. So because the oil was still there, okay, and they were selling it in the future, they decided, the oil companies, they started to buy their own oil back from the stock exchange. You see? So they sell it to the brokers in New York and London. Then they bought it back from them. They actually, the brokers and the day traders paid the oil companies again to take back the contract. So if you had, so basically to answer your question, if you had lots of infrastructure, let's say if you had the empty oil tankers, if you had a natural gas field, oil field, you made a lot of money as an oil company. Who lost? New York and London during the collapse. That basically the day traders, if you call them.
Exactly. So similar thing, in fact, we face in the future smart grids, yani storage of electricity. When the electricity price is cheap, for example, if they produce from solar energy, they store it, and then when it is expensive, they sell it. So this is also becoming very popular in the near future. How to sell and buy the electricity using this regulatory framework and electricity trading.
Okay.
Another question, I think, for my side. So oil was the store. Will we have the same problem in the future if we use renewables and storage issue? Yani renewables have to store them.
I mean, it's a very good question. Do you want me to answer this question?
I can first say a couple of things.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
And renewables will also have a similar type of storage issue in the future because they are so-called intermittent. Daytime we have, sometimes we don't have wind blowing over the season. Sometimes we don't have waste or biomass. So we need to store them as well. If the consumption is reduced, you need to store it similar to oil somehow, or the prices will decrease similarly. But one advantage is that it is more flexible. Yani you can shut down or turn on these power plants, renewable power plants easily. Photovoltaics, for example, you have modular systems, 1 megawatt, 2 megawatt, 10 megawatt next to each other. You just click on the button, it turns off. It is easy. And on the other hand, there are more storage alternatives. And you can store in electrical energy form. You can store in thermal energy form. You can store in chemical energy form as well. You can convert the electricity, excess electricity into fuel and store in the tanks. So the options of storage, in fact, are wider. So that's why it brings more flexibility for supply and demand problems.
So, Yusuf, Dr. Yusuf, can you explain to us how we can transfer photovoltaic energy and mechanical energy, for example? Let's say for the DC region, what alternatives do we have? How do we do this?
Solar has different forms, but if we are focusing on photovoltaics mainly, of course, it is a semiconductor material that produces direct current. Yeah, we don't produce mechanical energy directly. So, in fact, the highest quality form of energy is electricity. Yeah, you want to produce eventually as a final product electricity. So this is quite good advantage to produce direct electricity from the sunlight. But in order to convert into other forms, for example, you may want to convert into cooling for these countries. Then you need to attach a refrigeration cycle, so-called, or cooling cycle. Vapor compression cycles can be added. They are mainly working on electricity, but you provide PV electricity to the vapor compression cycle for cooling generation. Or alternatively, solar energy can also be used as thermal energy for driving solar absorption cooling units. So those type of cooling refrigeration cycles, they use heat. So you supply about 80 Celsius heat, and then it converts into cooling. This is another promising alternative for, in fact, these Middle East countries to convert solar energy into cooling and for using in the domestic applications.
Question, Yusuf. I hear that sometimes in the winter, we get excess supply of electricity. What can we do about this? Can we electricity to use it, store it in another way, then use it again this summer. Let's say like we can push some water up a certain column and just keep it as a how can I call this? As a potential energy. Then we can drive the turbine later on in the summer. Or what can we do? What's there?
Exactly. Very good question. Yani, it is called seasonal energy storage. So some type of storage techniques can store longer periods of time. One of the examples that you gave is pumped hydro storage. Pumped hydro storage is a form of storage that you supply water to a higher level when you have excess electricity. You convert the electricity to a potential energy, and then when you need the electricity, you just discharge the electricity. You just discharge the water into the pump or say turbine, and then you produce electricity. So you don't lose much during this storage phase because it is a water accumulated in the tank or a dam. So that's why it can act as a seasonal storage medium. Also, other methods available. For example, they store ice and cold, or they can store thermal energy during storage. For example, summertime, you have high temperature outside, 50 Celsius. You store this 50 Celsius in phase change materials or in storage tanks, molten salt. Then you can sustain it with a good insulation for a longer period, 1 month. You can use it later on. So these type of seasonal storage methods are also available. In fact, they are good to control the supply and demand again of electricity or energy during these periods.
Excellent, Yusuf. Thank you so much for participating today. I think we have about 2 to 3 minutes left. Do you want to add anything, Yusuf, or?
From my side, I think that's all. But from both presentations, I think audience has understood that it is the correct time to take action to convert even the natural gas into cleaner forms of fuel or electricity using renewables. There's a very good match and synergy between them.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Yusuf. I think that concludes our very interesting webinar today. Thank you, Yusuf, for your time today. And the College of Science and Engineering for organizing this event with us. And of course, the Ministry of Transport and Communication for also sponsoring this event, I believe. And of course, I would like to thank the people that made this happen. The people are behind the background, like Mr. Azzuddin. Thank you so much for organizing this with us also. And of course, other attendees, we really thank you for taking the time. And if you have any questions, anything, please feel free to email us. You can find our emails in our HBKU website. We'll be happy if you have any questions about the college, the programs that we offer. We would love to answer these questions from you. Thank you all, and that's it. Have a fantastic afternoon. Thank you.